know that we're going to break out into groups, and or perhaps we're going to have a conversation here, but we might do a little bit of group talk and then come back. But I also found it fascinating that you talk about reducing greenhouse gas emissions by just cutting down on your food waste. Just even that is, how much could we reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
Estimate that we could reduce 6 to 8% of our current global greenhouse emissions by just not throwing away the food and only eating and buying what we need.
What you actually need, right? And I know we have chickens in the backyard, and so
you can
don't eat,
it's nice.
You know, it does go to the chickens. So
it does. It does.
Creates an
eat the eggs. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
So Christine, just what would you like to do? Since shall we break out into groups, or do you want to stay in this group and have some questions? I know in the chat box, I'm looking in there, we do have some questions that came in that perhaps we could, as a group, hear answers or responses to.
Yeah, I was looking at the time, and I think today we have a lot of time, and it's not such a big group. So let's take some questions.
Yeah.
And then we can break into our breakout rooms. I have 5 breakout rooms. And what I'll do is I'll just we'll be talking about guiding questions, and I'll just make sure to add them in the chat room. Or maybe Leanne, could you do that for us?
I think as we're here as a group together, one of the questions that came in from Marty Jordan, please address the fish farming practices that are not eco-friendly or healthy, because there's that concern about fish farming versus wild.
Yeah. So that's a good question. And we know that fish farming today is somewhat controversial, because fish farming is relatively new on a larger scale. So fish farming's happened in China and Asia for thousands of years, right? We all know that. What's happened is it become more of a larger farming system recently. So how I think about it is the agriculture practices in the US started very sort of, as more family farms, smaller, they grew to be larger, and now we're getting back to better and better practices. So there's been this series with fish farming where, yes, there have been some bad fish farming practices, just like we've seen happening on land. Water farmers were doing some of the same practices we saw with land farmers, right? But what we're seeing in the last 10 years, it's sort of what I've seen, just because I've been working in the aquaculture world for about 3 to 4 years now. And prior to that, I was in marine conservation and worked for NGOs. So I was quite skeptical as well. And what I've learned is that in the last few years, we're seeing a lot of change in the aquaculture field. There have been a lot more, there's a lot more standards around how fish is grown, what the feed is being used, what is happening with antibiotics, what is happening with the waste and the ecology of the area. So
the dye, DYE.
The dye is actually a whole different story that I can tell you, but a quick story is it's actually an algae. It's an algae that produces a red color, and it's naturally in the wild. Fish will eat red algae, and that's how they get that pink color. And so the algae is also fed to farmed fish. It's just made in fermentation, like I just explained it to you. So that's why they have to call it. It's not a natural algae they plucked out of the ocean. It's an algae that was grown in fermentation. Isn't that weird?
Yeah, that is so interesting.
Yeah.
Somebody asked, well, can't we just eat the fish oil? Or
yeah, you can. Yes, and people should. I'm not a nutritionist, but what I've been learning about it, and I have young kids, and same thing is that long-chain omega-3s are really important for brain development and important for eyes and joint development. And for those of us getting older, it's also really good, especially good for joint and continue the brain health as we get older. So you can eat fish oil, and you can find your vegetarian fish oil capsules, guys. That's algae.
So I know Ricky and Doug put this question in, McGlashan. Can we just eat the algae oil and not take it through the fish?
That's right. You can, if you get vegetarian, if you look for vegetarian fish oil, any supermarket, drugstore, wherever, that is algae oil.
Oh, so
we're not the only ones making it, right?
Okay.
So what we did, that's a good point. That's actually remember I told you it had the balloon with the oil inside? Someone's extracting that, right? And then packaging it for vitamins.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah.
And somebody's asking, can you please put up the second slide again while we're talking? With the second slide, you're
With the one with all the different kinds of carbon footprint for different foods, right?
right.
And just give me 1 sec.
Yeah, we'll keep talking while you do that.
Okay.
And then, can you list the Bay Area companies in the chat? I guess what Bay Area companies who are in this field as well.
Yeah. So, okay, there you go.
Here we go. So this is pretty intriguing for everyone. And we know beef is,
A lot of people heard about beef, right? Yeah. What's interesting here to me was the coffee was kind of interesting to me.
Yes.
And so was the chocolate. And the only thing I could guess on this one, you guys, was that for every hectare of land, you may not get very much coffee and chocolate from it. So you just don't, it's not a very efficient use of land. So you have to use a lot of land. You may have a lot of processing and there may be a lot of packaging. There's maybe parts of this, but here it's showing on this one that it's mostly land use. My guess is it's just not super productive. And so you don't have a ton of coffee per every hectare of land.
And I was surprised to see cheese kind of up there too.
Well, that just think dairy. So it's cows.
Oh, okay, it's cows.
Yeah. It's just the cows. Yeah. That one's high.
Okay. And rice, I always think of using a lot of water, but yeah.
Yeah. So it has a little note in here. And in this particular case, the flooded rice fields produce quite a bit of methane. And the quick tutorial on that is greenhouse gas emissions are more than just carbon. Methane is a greenhouse gas and there's other kinds. So it's another greenhouse gas that's actually more potent than carbon. So that's why that's so high here, is because that particular methane actually causes more impact.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And Jill, can you tell all of our friends here tonight about your background a little more and how did you learn about this exciting field?
Yeah, and so it's nice because I think a lot of you on the on the call really are interested in sustainability, and that was me. I was with NGOs and working in sustainability for 20 years before I moved into my first corporate experience. And the reason I went to this company that made algae products is I was very interested in two things. I was interested in reducing toxic chemicals in our planet and having chemicals that weren't made anymore from petroleum. And I learned about this algae oil and I was like, wow, this is a potential, right? And the second thing was I was interested in reducing carbon footprint of our production systems in general that make our products. And again, when I learned about fermentation, I didn't know anything about fermentation. When I learned about fermentation and that the power of what it can do, I was super excited. So whether it's algae or yeast or bacteria, like I said, all of it is really going to be the future of a lot of the foods we see.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
And then, have you heard that if you feed cows algae, they emit less methane?
Yes. Yay, you've heard that.
Well, Kaya wrote this in.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So that's seaweed, actually. So when I was talking to you about the 1/10 of a width of a piece of hair, the microalgae, that is when we say macroalgae, that's just another form of algae. That's seaweed, and all of us here in California are very familiar with kelp, right?
Yes.
So what they are feeding, they're doing a lot of interesting research on feeding red algae, and I don't have the exact species, to a different kind of seaweed to cows, and they're looking at 80% reduction in methane emissions. And I just gave you the little tutorial on methane, right, with rice. Same thing with the cows. One of the big reasons cows are such a big impact, not only because of the land use and all that graph we saw, right, but also because they let go of a lot of gas, and it's methane. And this seaweed, when it's mixed into their feed, is having incredible results. So I think you're going to see a lot of that in the future. It's really exciting.
And is it economical for the farmers?
Well, the thing about seaweed, don't get me started about seaweed because it's so amazing. But the thing about seaweed is that it grows. It is probably, I think it is the fastest growing plant on the planet.
Oh, that's
and it is a carbon sequester, right? So it just gobbles up carbon when it's growing in the ocean. And now there's been more and more seaweed farms happening. We don't have much in the US. 99% of the seaweed's grown in Asia. But there's a lot of work in Maine and Alaska and a little bit in California of growing more and more seaweed. And it's very economical. We're finding it's really exciting to see.
That's interesting because you would think California could become perhaps a leader in that. No?
It's mostly regulations right now. So a lot of it's grown currently in the economic zone that we basically have control over. That's from the coast to 3 miles. You guys may understand that's kind of our coastal zone, right? And that's what the U.S. owns, and then we have a smaller portion of that, and we're just having difficult with all of the regulatory it takes to cite something in the coastal zone of California. But there's a lot of people working on trying to get that change for seaweed.
Yeah, it's interesting because seaweed, I mean, grows naturally.
Exactly.
Okay.
As well as seaweed farms. There's both. It's natural, people are harvesting it, and there's farms that people are growing it. Just like oysters, they grow them a lot like oysters.
Yeah. Is there a difference between feedlot beef and range-fed beef?
You guys, I don't know that much about that.
Okay.
I think yeah, I mean, the most I know, is that range fed is typically eating the grass on the range, and those are actually quite efficient. There's a lot of work done on the grasslands in kind of Montana and south of there. All those grasslands. Actually, beef is actually doing a good job of maintaining that grassland and the soil. So actually there's a lot of good work that beef grown on that kind of land is very beneficial for many, many reasons. And so I'd like to learn more about that.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then Ricky and Doug McGlashan are asking, how does your kitchen look different than our kitchen? Like what's in there that you've got that's cutting?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So first of all, I take more omega-3 supplements. I have to say that.
How many? What's more?
How much more? So I take, the recommended is 250 milligrams a day. I take about twice of that. And this is a recommended for sort of internationally. The US hasn't set their recommendation yet, but, and for those of us, as I'm getting older, I'm definitely taking more. I basically have cut out a lot of meat, I have to say. And I've actually done that for health reasons as well. I have high cholesterol. And so that's what I've done. A lot more, veggies, a lot more whole grains as well. I'm really into farro lately. Does anyone know about that?
Farro?
It's a whole, farro and quinoa are one of I think the 2 grains that are whole proteins.
Excellent. Okay, well, thank you. And Christine, thanks, Jill. So great. Christine, do you want to do any breakouts for the questions you posted in the chat?
We could, but I think we just have done maybe time for about 10 minutes, and then I will
a little bit. Does everybody see the questions in the chat?
Yeah, let me try to.
You posted them, and if you scroll up, you can find them.
Well, let me read them to you real quick, also, so you have them. So, first guiding question is: in your opinion, what are the most promising and or simplest ways for us to transition to a low carbon food system? And the second guiding question is, do you think a carbon label, like a nutrition label on a food product that would tell you the carbon impact of the product you were buying could impact your buying decision? And if yes, what information would you like to see on the label? So let's do that. I mean, let me launch the groups, and then I'll bring you back in about 10 minutes so we can have a debrief and ask Jill some more questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, here we go. All right, so sync, yeah.
So what you So what you're saying is eat more local food, right? To avoid
Yeah.
long distance.
Maybe about, maybe about a half to 2/3 of the weight, which now we're
Right.
having all the food miles. So I'm wondering
Yeah.
if the vendors could figure out a way that, to package the product to
True. Megan, do you think that people, you're the youngest here, so putting you on the spot.
Oh, come on. Are you sure?
I happen to know how old she is.
I know.
Do you think your group, your age group, is like looking at this issue, or do you have any conversations about this?
Maybe I'm a little skewed
Yeah, I think so.
who my friends are, but I definitely have friends that aren't environmental science majors who are starting to think about the food waste, and I think Stanford's really up there where it's talking about where it's that food
It's really important.
Jill, I have you wanted to say something about the most effective thing.
Yeah.
Oh, hugely effective step, of course, is giving up the eating of meat, which we did, I don't know, how long ago was that?
When Charles McGlashan died, actually.
Oh, really? Because he died of a heart attack, didn't he? Yeah, that's right.
No, not really, but anyway, that's another story. Sorry.
Yeah. At any rate, I thought it would be a big deal, and it's actually not that big a deal. And Ricky's very creative in cooking and putting things together, and I don't miss it.
Yeah. I have to say, I haven't given up fish yet. And that is because fish float. So the reason that a lot of animals take more carbon emissions as well, or cause carbon emissions, is they need to eat enough to stay warm and to stand and defy gravity, just like we do. But fish float. So they don't actually have as much of an impact on the planet because they don't need as much energy, and they call feed conversion. How much do they have to eat to grow is much lower. So I haven't yet decided. I think I've decided that I'm still on fish, but I'm not sure. I still feel pretty good about that.
We heard Sylvia Earle, famous oceanographer, who's not quite our age. So I don't know, she's probably approaching 70.
Yeah.
And it was a very compelling speech. And she says she just doesn't eat fish anymore because of the whole food chain thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Anyway, I do miss fish. I don't miss cows.
Yeah.
How does anyone feel about today's news that Mobil Oil lost shareholders forced Mobil Oil to jettison 2 of their board members, and 2 climate change, two climate
change activists were elected to the board of Exxon.
I heard there was a proposal. I didn't know what happened.
It happened. In addition to that, Shell was told by a Dutch court they have to reduce their carbon emissions by something like 45% by 2030.
Did that pass? Because I don't know how you're actually going to do it.
That came out today as well.
Did it pass?
Hi, Christine.
Oh, hi, Carol.
Was I supposed to come back?
That's okay. I'm wondering, oh, did you do that yourself, maybe?
Oh, I just left the room. I just said it had a thing on the bottom. You know, well, somebody was starting to talk about the treatment of animals, and I didn't want to hear it, so I just left. And, and it looked like you were trying to wrap it back up anyway, so.
Yeah, no, that's good. Actually, I just closed it, but I mean, I forgot because I thought when I closed that it brings back people immediately, but it looks like it's counting down. So another half a minute and then everybody should be back for the debrief. So you were in the breakout room with Davis, Diana, and Jamie, right?
Yes.
Okay, did you have a good discussion?
Yeah, it was pretty good.
Yeah, it's a vast topic. I mean, I think, you know, when you start opening it up, so here we have more people joining us. Great. We'll just give a few seconds for everybody to come back. And Kirsten, you're on mute. And I think we have everyone back. So I'll turn it over to you, Kirsten.
Oh, great. So I would just love to hear what people think would make it easy to transition. What do you think the easiest things are? Oh my gosh, my dog is throwing toys in front of me here. And feel free to unmute.
Well, we talked about reducing waste, food waste.
Yes.
Since that was talked, and you know, working with the vendors to you know, extend the labels for the expiry dates, and also, you know, informing people they don't really need to follow that. They can just use their nose. You know that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because so many people see the expiration date and think, oh God, no way. That's good. Anybody else? Jill, what do you think is the #1 way to help transition?
Well, I think the McGlashans have actually taken a big step when you went vegetarian. I think that is part of what we can do. Absolutely. I think that's that's how kind of it comes to mind for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at least, you know, reduce. So what we're seeing, I would say also, is that people are going flexitarian, especially this next generation, right? Where maybe just meat once a week. So
right, there was that whole, meatless Mondays.
That's easier, right? Is to start that process with just reducing it a little bit.
Right, right.
Oh, I like that term. Did you say flexitarian?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is that, meaning that I'll eat, I'll eat some vegetarian some night I'll have fish or chicken or beef, but that I'm open to both, and that I'm actively doing that because I'm trying to reduce my meat consumption.
Yeah.
I like that term because that's what our family started maybe about a year or two ago. So now we're like half the meal is vegetarian. So but it's hard.
Yes, that's exactly what it's reflecting, that trend that you just are talking about.
Yeah. And I was interested because I heard you say it's hard. So what do you find hard? Is it like to come up with like different variety of food recipes?
Yeah, because we have 2 teenage boys, and like 2 days ago we make 2 cups of so we double the serving on the curry lentil that we make a lot, and literally 1.5 meal they're all gone. So yes, so I'm trying to get more variety, and also they get used to, they like the eggs, they like the the milk and the cheese. So it's a way you change, but you can't really, it's hard to change all of it at one time. So to me, it's a gradual change. Sometimes my husband say, "Oh, you're not feeding us any real food."
I hear you on the husband topic.
So, but it's okay. It takes time. And I shared with my group earlier. I think education is very critical. I mean, I didn't know about a lot of this, and I happened to listen to Michael Pollan's book In Defense of Food, and I listened to, I think, like 3 times because I was shocked at some of the things I learned. I was like, oh my God, I'm so bad, So so from that I start learning more and participate in these organizations, and I'm just kind of learning along. And Carol was in my group, and we talk about the Food Revolution Network, which is found by John Robbins. And he's basically, I think, Carol, you read part of his book. I never read his book, but he's the son of Baskin Robbins Empire, the ice cream. So when he was a teenager, he decided, he's thinking, this is not healthy. He sort of took his own separate journey. So I think he's one of the pioneers of these, the vegetarian type of food movement. So anyway, so he just finished, and I think that's something good, because I'm sure, because it's really hard. I think people need to in order to change, you always have to have some reason and incentive, right? So, and I feel like the more we understand and be educated, then yes, that is the book, A Diet for a New America, that it helps. I didn't understand any of these, like,
I read that diet for
7 years.
Oops, sorry, that's my dog. Oh, I'm gonna have to mute, I guess. Okay, never mind.
So anyway,
it looks like it looks like the dog agrees with what Jamie was saying. So I was wondering also what you all think about price signals, and I know, I mean, we are getting into the equity issue as well, but meat is very inexpensive here, and so I think that's definitely encouraging people to eat more meat. I mean, if it would be more expensive, I think people would reduce the consumption of meat. What do you think?
I was a vegetarian in my early 20s, and to me, there's no question it's great and whatever. But the reason that I stopped is social. It just, you're requiring, if you get invited to a dinner party, you're requiring the hostess to choose what she's cooking based on your demands, and also just going out to restaurants. But it's nice to see that things are changing. I like the idea of flexitarian, and you see on restaurant menus now many more vegetarian options.
Yeah, I hear you, Kaya, about that. And my brother was a vegan for a while, and I said, so what, when you come visit, what should we feed you? And he said, I'll eat whatever on the table. And I think that's where, anybody can be a flexitarian to that degree. Like, and rather than putting everybody through your hoops, like when you cook, you can give them a delicious vegan or vegetarian, but when somebody else cooks for you, you can say, hey, this is fun eating meat for a change.
I just tell people I'll eat, anything that's not the meat stuff. It's not a big deal because it's really about getting together, right? It's about being together and being social. And I have plenty of food. There's a shortage, so it's more social. So yeah.
Yeah, I think to build on what people were saying, I think the plant-based alternatives to meats and dairies and eggs and stuff like that is the easiest way to help people transition, because those things will cook the same way, they taste the same way, they have the same kind of nutrition profile as meat, and I guess to Christine's point, they do cost a little bit more, but to your pocketbook, but they have a much less impact on the carbon emissions.
Jill, can we, that's so true. And I just wanted to ask you, Jill, on kind of a closing note here, do you see, is there a discussion about getting carbon labels on products? Is this something that's coming? Is there legislation? And go ahead.
Yeah, I haven't seen legislation yet. The first thing I've seen, I don't know if you guys saw some new runners that just came out from Allbirds that have the carbon footprint on it. And that's kind of cool to check out. I've heard more talk of it in Europe than I have here, but I think it's going to come. I think it will be someday. I just don't know how soon, but I think
5 years. Yeah.
I was telling my group, oh, go ahead.
Oh, we actually talked a little bit about that in our group, and one of the things we were wondering is, if something is sourced from a local point of view, it has lot less food miles, but the same food, if it's shipped halfway around the world, suddenly has a lot of fuel miles, especially if it's airship. So,
and if it's,
how do you account for the carbon labeling, for the same food, because it will change from where it's finally purchased and consumed.
And how it's packaged besides, there's just so many things to it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think, they'll have to work with that, but you're absolutely right. It has to be where it's actually consumed.
So who puts it on? Is it the farmer or is it the grocery store? And how do you deal with all the small producers and the small vendors?
That's right. It's going to be the producer who is responsible for the nutrition label will be the one who has to have the responsibility for figuring out the carbon label. But what's interesting is most of these companies are already collecting the carbon footprint data from all their suppliers already. So yeah, I mean, almost if you're in any business, a lot of, we were a supplier to so many people, right? To so many things, and everybody starting to ask now for the carbon footprint of our product and their, all their ingredients.
Yeah, and that's really great, because then you're talking like supply chain, and you have more like a systemic, solution to or approach. I mean, in a sense.
Yeah.
So
posted CSA's ROC, community supported agriculture, right? And that's your farmers markets are getting goods delivered to your home from local farms to support them.
Yeah.
So it's 6:32, so we are over, but this has been a fascinating conversation on low carbon food systems, and hopefully we make a little ripple effect in our own communities by, now that you've enlightened us, Jill, and we've had discussions, we can talk to our neighbors and our friends about this and see how we can make an impact.
Yeah, and I wanted to thank all of you for coming, Kirsten for doing a fabulous job at, moderating, and Jill, I mean, very inspiring presentation. I learned a ton. So
the faster I talk, the more you learn, right?
yeah, so maybe we'll have to have you back at some point.
I would love it. I would love it. I could talk to you about other issues as well. So that would be fun.
And thanks all for joining, and I hope you will join us again in June. In June, it's going to be a different topic, the drought, and also how we can start to plan better for long-term planning. And with that, thank you again, and you have a wonderful evening.
Good night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.
Bye.